is a moment in every destiny when heaven leans closely, a moment when God calls a name that earth has ignored, a moment when divine attention rests on a life that seemed ordinary, forgotten, or delayed. And tonight you are standing at the edge of such a moment, because when we invoke the God of Abraham, the God who lifts men from obscurity to influence, the God who breaks cycles that held families for generations, the God who calls greatness out of nothing, we are not praying a casual prayer. We are summoning the same voice that pulled Abraham out of idolatry, the same hand that lifted him above limitation, the same promise that turned his life into a generational prophecy. There is a lifting reserved for those who dare to believe that God can do with them what he did with Abraham. There is a breakthrough waiting for the one who says, Lord, rewrite my story. There is a shift prepared for the destiny that cries, lift me beyond the boundaries of my past. And as we begin this prayer, may your heart open, your faith rise, and your spirit catch fire, because the God of Abraham is about to lift your destiny in ways you never imagined. The God of Abraham is the God of lifting. And when you understand this truth deeply, something shifts inside your spirit. Abraham's story is not just a historical record, it is a prophetic pattern. A spiritual template that reveals how God can pick a man from nothing and turn him into a nation. When we say, God of Abraham, lift my destiny, we are invoking the same God who specializes in taking ordinary, forgotten, overlooked people and placing them on platforms they never imagined. Abraham was not born into greatness. He was not raised in a lineage of prophets, kings, or spiritual giants. He lived in awe of the Chaldeans, a land surrounded by idolatry, a place without covenant, a place without promise. Nothing in his environment suggested he would ever become a father of nations. Yet, when the God of Abraham stepped into his life, something supernatural began to unfold. It means that when God decides to lift a destiny, environment is not a barrier, background is not a verdict, and human limitations cannot stop divine elevation. Abraham is proof that destiny lifting begins when God's voice interrupts your normal. To understand the lifting that comes from the God of Abraham, you must look at how he introduced himself. God didn't start by showing Abraham the final picture. He started by calling him out. Leave your father's house, leave your country, leave your people. That command was not just physical movement, it was spiritual separation. When God lifts a destiny, he lifts you out of places, people, habits, cycles, mindsets, and limitations that are no longer permitted to follow you into your future. Abraham's rising began the moment he stepped away from the familiar and embraced the unknown with faith. This reveals that destiny lifting is not always comfortable. It stretches you, pulls you into unfamiliar territory, and forces you to trust God beyond logic. But those who say yes to God's call, like Abraham did, unlock realms of lifting that human effort can never produce. When you say, God of Abraham, lift my destiny, you are asking God to do for you what he did for a man who had no reference point for greatness. Abraham had no spiritual father showing him the path, no mentor guiding him, no system supporting him. His rise came only by the hand of God. That means your destiny too can be lifted by a God who does not require a resume, a connection, or a platform to raise you. He is the God who makes men by himself. He is the God who announces people without human permission. He is the God who takes obscurity and turns it into influence. Abraham wasn't just blessed, he was transformed. God changed his name, his identity, his capacity, and even his thinking. Every time God lifts a destiny, he begins by lifting the person internally before lifting them externally. Divine lifting always starts in the heart before it becomes visible in life. The God of Abraham is also the God who honors covenant with faith. Abraham believed God when there was no evidence to support what was spoken. He believed when his body was old. He believed when his wife's womb was barren. He believed when circumstances contradicted the promise. And because he believed, God lifted him beyond the limitations of his natural reality. This means that destiny lifting does not depend on perfect conditions. It depends on perfect trust. When you dare to believe the God of Abraham, even when everything around you says it is impossible, you step into a realm where God begins to suspend natural laws in your favor. Abraham's lifting was not the result of human logic. It was the result of supernatural intervention. Likewise, when you call on the God of Abraham, you are calling on the God who knows how to bypass earthly protocols to fulfill his word concerning your life. This God is also the God of divine selection. He chose Abraham when Abraham did not choose him. He called him out when Abraham was not looking for him. This reveals a mystery. Divine lifting is often initiated by God's mercy, not human merit. The God of Abraham lifts people because of his love, his purpose, and his covenant, not because anyone qualifies. This guarantees that the same God who reached for Abraham can reach for you. He can pull you out of the background, take you out of the shadows, separate you from cycles that swallowed others in your family, and reposition you for a destiny that your lineage has never touched. When God decides to lift a person, no history can stop him, no enemy can resist him, and no system can block him. And when God lifted Abraham, he didn't just elevate him personally. He transformed him into a generational voice. Abraham became a reference point for nations, a foundation for blessings, a father of faith. His lifting extended far beyond his lifetime. That is the kind of lifting you are invoking when you call on the God of Abraham. It is not a small lifting. It is not temporary. It is not shallow. It is destiny defining, generation shifting, lineage transforming lifting. The God who took a man from nothing and made him a prototype of greatness is the same God who can take your destiny and breathe upon it until everything God saw in you before you were born begins to manifest. So when you say, God of Abraham, lift my destiny, you are not praying a casual prayer. You are summoning the God who turns ordinary men into spiritual landmarks. You are calling on the God whose presence rewrites stories and whose hand raises people to levels they never imagined. And the same God who lifted Abraham is still lifting men today. Obedience is the doorway through which destiny lifting begins, and Abraham's entire journey proves this truth in a profound and undeniable way. When God called Abraham, he didn't begin by giving him blessings, signs, or assurances. He began with an instruction. Go from your country, your family, and your father's house to a land that I will show you. That command was not only a physical movement, but a spiritual test, a divine filter that separated those who desire greatness from those who are ready to obey for it. Abraham's destiny did not rise because he wished for it, prayed for it, or desired it. His lifting began because he obeyed. Every time God desires to lift a destiny, he begins with a seemingly simple instruction that carries supernatural consequence. Obedience is the womb where lifting is conceived, nurtured, and birthed. Obedience demands trust, and trust requires surrender. Abraham did not argue with God, negotiate with him, or ask him to show the full picture before moving. He obeyed with partial information because he trusted the one who gave the instruction. This reveals a powerful truth. Destiny lifting rarely happens when everything is clear. It happens when everything is uncertain, yet you choose to obey anyway. God told Abraham, "To a land I will show you, not a land I have shown you." The instruction came before the clarity. And this is the pattern of God. Clarity follows obedience, not the other way around. Many destinies remain grounded because people wait for explanations before they move. Abraham rose because he moved before he understood. Obedience to God is not about convenience. It is about commitment. It is the willingness to step into the unknown because God's voice is more reliable than your environment. Abraham's obedience was not selective. He didn't obey only the instructions that were easy or the ones that aligned with his comfort. He obeyed the difficult ones, the ones that stretched him, the ones that made no sense, the ones that demanded sacrifice. When God asked him to leave his land, he obeyed. When God asked him to separate from Lot, he obeyed. When God asked him to believe for a child in old age, he obeyed. And even when God asked him to offer Isaac, the son he waited decades for, the son who was tied to the promise itself, he obeyed. This degree of obedience reveals why God trusted him with destiny lifting of such magnitude. When your obedience becomes complete, your lifting becomes inevitable. God lifts men in response to obedience that proves the heart is aligned to his will. Obedience is the currency of spiritual advancement. Every instruction from God carries within it a portion of your future. When you obey, you unlock the portion hidden inside that instruction. Abraham did not know that leaving his father's house was the key to becoming a father of nations. He did not know that separation from Lot was the key to seeing the land God promised. He did not know that offering Isaac would seal a covenant that generations would depend on. Yet every act of obedience opened another layer of his destiny. This is why many destinies stagnate, not because the devil is too powerful, but because obedience is too inconsistent. God can lift any man, but he will not lift a man who cannot follow divine direction. Every breakthrough God wants to give you is tied to an instruction you must obey. And every destiny God wants to elevate is connected to a decision you must make. Obedience proves trust, and trust opens doors that talent, intelligence, and effort cannot. Abraham did not rise because he was the most skilled or the most qualified. He rose because he obeyed the voice that others ignored. When God sees a heart that obeys, He commits Himself to lifting that destiny. Obedience is God's invitation to take charge of your future. It is the evidence that you choose God's plan over your comfort, timing, or understanding. People pray for lifting, but lifting responds to obedience. Abraham's life teaches us that destiny lifting is not an event, it is a journey of continuous obedience. One instruction at a time, one sacrifice at a time, one step of faith at a time. Obedience also breaks limitations that disobedience builds. Abraham came from a lineage trapped in idolatry, patterns, and stagnation. One act of obedience broke a generational cycle. God often uses obedience to disconnect you from cycles that held your family bound. When you obey divine instruction, you step into a realm where history no longer dictates your destiny. Abraham obeyed, and God separated him from the limitations of his father's house. Many people want the blessing of Abraham without the obedience of Abraham. But God lifts those who follow him even when it is uncomfortable. And finally, obedience attracts divine presence. God remained committed to Abraham because Abraham remained committed to obedience. Every time Abraham obeyed, God spoke again. Every time Abraham followed, God revealed more. This shows that obedience sustains divine communication. Many people do not hear God because they ignored the last instruction He gave. But when you obey faithfully, heaven continues to open over your life. And when heaven remains open, lifting becomes a natural consequence. Abraham became a great man not by striving but by obeying. His name became a covenant reference because his obedience was unwavering. So when you cry, God of Abraham, lift my destiny, understand that the God of Abraham lifts through obedience. He honors obedience. He rewards obedience. He multiplies obedience. And the same way Abraham's yes to God altered his destiny forever, your obedience today carries the power to rewrite your story, open new chapters, and lift you into the place God has always prepared for you. The lifting of Abraham's destiny was not accidental or unpredictable. It was rooted in covenant. When we speak of the God of Abraham, we are speaking of a God who binds himself to his promises, a God whose word becomes a legal foundation for destiny elevation. Abraham did not rise because of luck or coincidence. He rose because God entered into a covenant with him. And that covenant became a spiritual platform that lifted him above the circumstances of his life. A covenant is not an agreement between equals. It is a divine commitment where God takes responsibility for the destiny of a man. When God covenants with you, He becomes obligated by His integrity, by His name, and by His purpose to ensure your lifting. This is why the blessing of Abraham could not fail. It was anchored in a covenant too strong for circumstances to break. When God established covenant with Abraham, He was not merely promising blessings. He was establishing identity, purpose, and destiny direction. He told Abraham, I will bless you, not I might bless you. He said, I will make your name great, not I will try. The language of covenant is the language of certainty, assurance, and divine backing. This means that Abraham's rise was guaranteed before it even began. What lifts a destiny is not human connections. It is the weight of divine promise resting upon a man's life. When the God of Abraham steps into your story, He does not speak suggestions. He speaks covenants. And when He speaks a covenant, His power ensures that human limitations cannot reverse it. Every covenant God initiates becomes a spiritual elevator that lifts destinies beyond what their natural strength can accomplish. Covenant is the realm where God's faithfulness meets man's alignment. Abraham aligned himself through faith and obedience, but the strength of the covenant rested on God's unchanging nature. Scripture says that God swore by Himself because there was no one greater to swear by. This means that God tied Abraham's destiny lifting to His own integrity. If Abraham failed, God would still be faithful. If situations shifted, God's promise would still stand. That covenant became a shield around Abraham's life, ensuring protection, provision, fruitfulness, and preservation. Covenant turns God's promise into your heritage. Covenant makes your destiny too backed for failure. Abraham walked in this dimension, and because of that covenant, no battle could overpower him, no enemy could defeat him, and no season could reduce him. His rising was not fragile, it was secured through divine commitment. Covenant also establishes transgenerational lifting. The moment God covenanted with Abraham, He included his seed, his lineage, and his generations after him. This means that lifting in the covenant is not selfish or solitary. It flows from one life into many. Isaac rose because of covenant. Jacob rose because of covenant. Joseph rose because of covenant. The children of Israel escaped Egypt because of covenant. Every lifting connected to Abraham came from a promise God made generations earlier. This is spiritual evidence that covenant is not just for your destiny. It is for those who come after you. When God lifts a man through covenant, he lifts families, nations, and generations through that man. Abraham became a foundational pillar for blessings that outlived him. Destiny lifting through covenant is never temporary. It is eternal, enduring, and generational. Covenant is also the realm where God partners with a destiny. He does not just send help, he becomes the help. He does not just give blessings, he becomes the blessing. When he told Abraham, I am your shield and your exceeding great reward, he revealed that covenant lifting is not about what God gives. It is about who God becomes in your life. When the God of Abraham enters your life through covenant, you are no longer trying to rise by effort. God himself becomes your advantage. Abraham survived battles because God fought for him. He prospered because God favored him. He expanded because God multiplied him. The covenant becomes the invisible force pushing your destiny upward, even when you do not see it happening. And covenant redefines destiny possibilities. Abraham was old, childless, and naturally unqualified for greatness. But covenant suspended natural laws and rewrote his destiny. Covenant allowed God to take a barren couple and turn them into the origin of nations. Covenant turned impossibility into testimony. Covenant lifted Abraham from fatherless to father of many. This is why covenant lifting is superior to human effort. What men call impossible, covenant makes inevitable. When you invoke the God of Abraham, you are invoking the God who uses covenant to override age, time, limitation, and biology. Covenant lifting is supernatural lifting. Lifting that does not depend on your background. Lifting that does not bow to your environment. Lifting that does not collapse because of challenges. Finally, covenant produces results that compel honor. Abraham became great not because he was seeking greatness, but because the covenant upon his life made it so. People blessed him because the covenant commanded it. Kings feared him because the covenant protected him. Nations recognized him because the covenant announced him. There is a dimension of lifting where God makes your name great, not by human publicity, but by divine endorsement. This is the dimension Abraham walked in, and this is the dimension anyone touches when they call on the God of Abraham with faith. So when you ask the God of Abraham to lift your destiny, you are asking for covenant-based lifting. The kind that cannot fail, cannot be reversed, and cannot be hindered. You are asking for the same God who bound himself to a man and turned him into a template of greatness to bind himself to your destiny and lift you beyond every limitation that ever existed around your life. The blessing of Abraham is not just a spiritual statement. It is a mantle of divine acceleration. When God lifted Abraham, he didn't take decades to prove his faithfulness. From the moment God spoke, things began to shift in Abraham's life. Divine speed is one of the clearest signatures of the God of Abraham. It is the supernatural ability to cover in 1 year what others struggle to achieve in 10. It is the grace that compresses time, multiplies results, and propels a destiny beyond natural limitations. Abraham's story is a blueprint of how God can take a man from delay, stagnation, and obscurity and accelerate him into a realm of rapid fulfillment. When the mantle of Abraham rests upon a destiny, you move with a pace that surprises those who once wrote you off. Abraham did not rise through slow progress, he rose through sudden interventions. Immediately after God called him, favor followed him, resources found him, territories opened for him, kings honored him, nations recognized him. There was a speed to his destiny that no natural explanation could justify. He stepped into Canaan and God immediately affirmed, to your offspring I will give this land. He interceded for a nation and God answered swiftly. He warred against kings and God gave him victory without delay. This is acceleration. When God's hand moves ahead of your effort, when the results in your life do not match the time invested, when your testimony arrives earlier than expected. Divine acceleration is not about rushing. It is about God lifting you above time and allowing his purpose to manifest at a supernatural pace. Divine acceleration is also revealed in the way God restored time in Abraham's life. Even though Abraham started late, God ensured he did not finish late. Abraham encountered God at 75, an age when most people have stopped expecting change. But destiny lifting through the God of Abraham is not age dependent. When God lifts a man, he restores lost years, lost opportunities, lost seasons, and lost moments. God compressed time for Abraham by giving him promises that outlived human expectation. He made his name great in a season that should have been retirement. He gave him a son at an age considered medically impossible. He renewed his strength so that his age did not become his limitation. When divine acceleration comes upon a destiny, time becomes a servant instead of an enemy. Things that delayed for years suddenly align. What seemed impossible begins to unfold effortlessly. The blessing of Abraham also accelerates fruitfulness. Before God stepped in, Abraham's life was marked by barrenness, delay, and silence. But when the blessing rested on him, every area of unproductivity became a testimony. Land responded to him. Wealth responded to him. Nations responded to him. Spiritual dimensions opened to him. Everything around Abraham began to multiply. Divine acceleration turns barrenness into abundance and emptiness into overflow. It is the kind of blessing that makes your efforts produce results bigger than your input. It is when you plant one seed and reap an entire harvest. When God lifts a destiny with the blessing of Abraham, he doesn't just add, he multiplies. This multiplication is the accelerator that takes a destiny from smallness to enlargement, from limitation to expansion, from scarcity to plenty. Another sign of divine acceleration in Abraham's story is how God aligned destiny helpers to him. Abraham did not walk alone. God sent men to support, protect, and honor him. Melchizedek blessed him. Kings respected him. Servants joined him. Even nations feared him. When acceleration rests on you, the right people begin to appear at the right time. Destiny lifting is never a lonely journey. It is accompanied by divine relationships orchestrated by God himself. These people help you move faster, climb higher, see clearer, and arrive quicker at the place God has prepared. The God of Abraham does not only lift you, he arranges the environment to match the lifting. Acceleration is also seen in the speed of divine manifestation. When God promises a thing through covenant, he ensures that delays do not overpower destiny. Abraham waited for Isaac, yes, but notice that every other promise happened with unusual speed. Land came quickly, wealth came quickly, influence came quickly, victory came quickly, protection came quickly. God accelerated every dimension of Abraham's destiny because Abraham aligned himself with God's timing. Sometimes acceleration comes after a period of pruning, shaping, or waiting. Because what God plans to do in months will shock those who have known your years. Abraham's rise after years of obscurity shows that divine speed is not the absence of process. It is the supernatural shortening of process. And divine acceleration is always accompanied by divine preservation. When God lifts quickly, he sustains completely. Abraham's speed did not destroy him, it established him. Many rise quickly and collapse quickly. But Abraham rose quickly and stayed lifted because the God of Abraham does not accelerate a man only to abandon him. When destiny lifting comes through God, stability accompanies speed. God protected him from enemies, from mistakes, from losses, and from downfall. Acceleration without preservation leads to destruction, but the God of Abraham gives both at the same time. Finally, the blessing of Abraham accelerates destiny impact. Abraham became a reference point in a short time. Generations after him still call his name. Nations still connect to his covenant. His obedience, faith, and alignment created a ripple effect that shaped history. Divine acceleration turns ordinary lives into generational legacies. It turns testimonies into landmarks. It turns faith into foundations that others build on. When God lifts you with acceleration, he lifts you in a way that your impact becomes timeless. So when you invoke the God of Abraham to lift your destiny, you are not asking for small progress. You are asking for supernatural speed. You are asking for the mantle that compresses time, multiplies results, summons helpers, breaks delay, and establishes you quickly at the place God has prepared. You are calling on the God who turned a 75-year-old man into a generational giant in record time. And the same God is able to accelerate your destiny in ways that will shock every expectation, silence every doubt, and reveal his glory in your life. Abraham's life is the clearest proof that when the God of Abraham steps into a destiny, every ancestral limitation is broken. He was not born into a spiritual lineage of greatness. His background was filled with idolatry, stagnation, and patterns that did not reflect the hand of God. He came from a family that worshipped other gods, a lineage with no record of covenant, promise, or divine destiny. Yet the moment God called him, the entire course of his bloodline changed. This is one of the deepest mysteries of destiny lifting. God does not need a perfect background to produce a glorious future. When the God of Abraham lifts a destiny, he disconnects you from every foundation that fights your rising and establishes you on a new path where divine purpose overrides natural history. Abraham was the first in his family to walk with God at this dimension. He was the first to receive a covenant, the first to hear God's voice, the first to carry prophecy for nations, the first to break out of idolatry. This makes him a breaker of cycles. His calling was not just a personal journey, It was a spiritual interruption that ended an old story and began a new one. God told him, leave your father's house, not just as a geographical instruction, but as a prophetic action. God was separating him from patterns, mindsets, limitations, and spiritual influences that were not permitted to follow him into the future God had prepared. When God lifts a destiny, he pulls you out of the cycles that swallowed others. He separates you from the grip of ancestral patterns so your life can be governed by covenant, not captivity. Abraham's rise shows that God can rewrite lineage. His past was not prophetic, his obedience was. Many people are held back not by their potential, but by invisible patterns in their bloodline. Cycles of shame, cycles of delay, cycles of failure, cycles of premature death, cycles of rising and falling, cycles of barrenness, cycles of addiction, cycles of marital instability, cycles of financial struggles. But when the God of Abraham steps in, those cycles lose their legal right. This is why God introduced himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, showing that once he breaks a cycle in one generation, he can maintain the blessing for those who come after. Abraham became the beginning of a new lineage, a reference point of blessing. His life became evidence that when God lifts a man, he lifts generations through him. God did not just bless Abraham, he transformed his identity. He changed his name from Abram to Abraham. He shifted his meaning from exalted father to father of many nations. This means that ancestral limitations are not only broken in the realm of circumstance, but also in identity. Many destinies suffer because they do not see themselves the way God sees them. Abraham's lifting required a new identity, a new perception, a new destiny blueprint. When God lifts you, he redefines who you are so you no longer carry the labels of your past. He takes away the identity of limitation and clothes you with an identity that matches his promise. The God of Abraham also breaks limitations by introducing covenant realities that swallow generational patterns. Abraham belonged to a barren lineage, yet God called him fruitful. He had no child, yet God called him father of nations. His circumstances contradicted his prophecy, yet God lifted him above natural logic. Every pattern of barrenness ended with Abraham because covenant is stronger than ancestry. There is no limitation in your background that covenant cannot override. When God decides to lift you, he does not consult what held your family back. He consults his promise. This is why the God of Abraham is the God who defies bloodline limitations. Where your lineage ended, God starts. Where others stopped, God pushes you beyond. What defeated others bows to the covenant on your life. God also breaks ancestral limitations by giving encounters that shift destiny trajectories. Abraham's encounters with God rewrote everything he knew about life. One encounter brought direction. Another brought covenant, another brought promise, another brought transformation. Every encounter was a strike against the limitations of his past. When God visits a destiny, he introduces revelations that uproot old patterns. God gave Abraham visions, promises, prophetic instructions, and divine assurances so that his mind, heart, and spirit could detach from the limitations of where he came from. Until your mind is delivered from your background, your destiny cannot rise above it. Abraham believed God, and that belief became the key that unlocked a new future. Furthermore, God broke ancestral limitations through supernatural empowerment. Abraham did not break free from his past by human strength. God empowered him. God enlarged him. God protected him. God multiplied him. God defended him. Human strength cannot break spiritual patterns, but divine empowerment can end in one generation what existed for centuries. Abraham experienced victory in battles, favor before kings, multiplication in wealth, and fruitfulness in old age because God had lifted him into a realm where natural limitations lost their influence. The God of Abraham empowers you to accomplish what no one before you could accomplish. And when God breaks ancestral limitations, he turns a destiny into a generational landmark. Abraham became a foundation for nations. He became a symbol of faith, covenant, and lifting. His testimony became a generational prophecy. What started as God lifting one man became God lifting millions through him. This is what happens when God breaks the limitations of a person. He turns them into a reference point. Your lifting becomes proof that God can rewrite any story. So when you call on the God of Abraham, you are calling on the God who breaks cycles, destroys limitations, rewrites lineage, redefines identity, and establishes new generational patterns of blessing. You are invoking the God who steps into a destiny and disconnects it from every ancestral chain so that your life becomes a testimony of what God can do. He chooses to lift a man beyond the boundaries of his past. When God lifted Abraham, the lifting did not stop with him. It flowed into generations. This is one of the most powerful truths about the God of Abraham. When he lifts a destiny, he lifts it in a way that outlives the individual. A lifted destiny is never for the benefit of one person alone. When God raises a man, he raises families, bloodlines, communities, and sometimes entire nations through that one man. Abraham's life shows that divine lifting is generational, influential, and expansive. God told him, "In you all the families of the earth will be blessed." That statement reveals the nature of God's intention. Abraham's lifting was never meant to end with Abraham. It was meant to flow from him to the world. This reveals a profound truth. Every time God lifts a destiny, he connects it to a purpose bigger than the person. When God lifts you, he makes you a reference point. Abraham became a spiritual landmark, a standard of faith, a foundational pillar for nations. Generations unborn were already tied to the blessing on his life. Isaac inherited it. Jacob carried it. Joseph expressed it. Nations benefited from it. Even today, millions still connect to it spiritually. This shows that when God lifts a man, he doesn't just give him success, he gives him a legacy. Abraham's destiny became a river that continued to flow long after he left the earth. A lifted destiny is one that God uses to shape future stories, create future testimonies, and influence future generations. When your destiny is lifted by God, the impact cannot be contained to your lifetime. A lifted destiny also becomes a generational covering. The covenant God made with Abraham provided protection, favor, and spiritual backing for his descendants. When famine came, Isaac survived. When enemies came, God defended Jacob. When oppression came, God brought Israel out of Egypt, not because they were righteous, but because Abraham carried a covenant that extended beyond him. When God lifts you, he establishes something in your lineage that protects those who come after you. Your prayers become seeds that cover your children. Your obedience becomes a shield for your descendants. Your spiritual alignment becomes a foundation they inherit. Abraham's life teaches us that God lifts men so that their generations will not suffer what they suffered. A lifted destiny becomes a channel of blessing. Abraham was not blessed for himself alone. He was blessed to be a blessing. Everything God gave him, wealth, influence, wisdom, favor, was meant to serve a divine purpose. When God lifts you, he positions you to help others rise. You become the one God uses to open doors for others, to break barriers for others, to create opportunities for others. Abraham interceded for nations, rescued his nephew, blessed kings, and influenced territories. A true lifting is not selfish, it overflows. When God lifts a destiny, he enlarges the capacity of that person to bless and influence others in ways that reflect his goodness. A lifted destiny becomes a testimony that inspires faith. Millions today draw strength from Abraham's story. His journey has become a message. His obedience has become a lesson. His faith has become a template. His covenant walk has become a standard. When God lifts you, he turns your life into a story that encourages others. There are people in the future who will believe in God because of what he does with your life. There are hearts that will be strengthened because of your testimony. There are destinies that will be restored because your story will prove that God can transform anyone. This is why God lifts people in ways that become unforgettable. He wants your life to speak long after your voice goes silent. Abraham's destiny also proves that lifted people carry generational responsibility. When God lifts a destiny, he expands its assignment. Abraham was lifted not just to enjoy blessings, but to carry a divine mandate, to birth a lineage, establish faith, and carry God's covenant in the earth. Lifting is not just promotion, it is purpose expanding. It is destiny stretching. It is God entrusting more to your hands because he has seen your heart. A lifted destiny becomes a partner in divine agenda. Abraham was not just a man, he became a system God used to carry out eternal plans. When God lifts you, he draws you into his purpose so deeply that your life begins to shape things that matter eternally. And finally, a lifted destiny leaves a spiritual imprint that cannot be erased. Abraham's name continues to speak because God himself announced him. This is the mystery of divine lifting. God makes your destiny too relevant to be forgotten. When God lifts you, your existence becomes a point of reference in both the physical and spiritual realms. Heaven recognizes you, earth honors you, and generations remember you. Abraham's lifting was not momentary, it became eternal. His name is forever tied to faith, covenant, blessing, and destiny transformation. So when you call on the God of Abraham and ask him to lift your destiny, you are not asking for personal success. You are asking for generational impact. You are asking for a lifting that outlives you, a lifting that transforms your lineage, a lifting that becomes a blessing to others, a lifting that turns your life into a testimony and and a lifting that positions you in God's eternal plan. The God of Abraham does not lift a life halfway. He lifts in a way that writes history, influences generations, and reveals his glory through the destiny he has chosen. As we stand under the atmosphere of this revelation, may your heart recognize that the God of Abraham is not a story to admire, but a destiny to inherit. He is the God who lives without permission from men, the God who rewrites lineage, the God who breaks limitations, the God who accelerates purpose, the God who honors covenant, and the God who turns ordinary lives into generational testimonies. Everything he did with Abraham was not to impress us. It was to instruct us that he is still lifting men, still calling men, still blessing men, still transforming lives, still breaking cycles, still creating new beginnings, and still establishing covenants that shake generations. And now, as you declare, God of Abraham, lift my destiny. May every barrier that held your life bow, may every generational limitation lose its grip. May every closed door open under the weight of his covenant. May the mantle of Abraham's acceleration rest upon you. May divine speed replace years of delay. May the blessing that outlives you begin upon your life today. May God separate you from anything that reduces you and align you with everything that was written about your destiny before time began. May your faith rise. May your obedience deepen. May your steps be ordered. May your spirit remain aligned. And may your life become a living evidence that the God who lifted Abraham is still rewriting stories, still lifting destinies, and still revealing his glory in the lives of those who dare to believe. Gulo Yuski and Tien, Yehu Mesa G, thank you for giving your heart, your time, and your spirit to this journey of prayer and revelation. May the God of Abraham surround you with mercy, favor, and divine protection. May good news follow you, breakthroughs locate you, and testimonies surprise you. Good luck in every step you take, and may the hand of God lift you higher than your expectations. God bless you richly, and thank you for listening.